Hello, writers. Have you ever bought a writing craft book someone says you just have to read?
Is it still sitting on your shelf? Have you even cracked the spine?
That's totally me.
Don't ask Renee how many craft books she owns.
Why do we keep buying these books we never read?
We all want to improve as writers, but that's hard to do alone.
That's why we started the Words to Write By podcast, to tackle these books together, chapter by chapter, and learn from their advice.
Or not. Sometimes they're wrong.
Hi, I'm Renee Nelson, former college writing instructor turned full-time writer and podcaster. After many years, I finally have a complete draft of my memoir.
And I'm Kim Smugado, author of the humorous fantasy novel Our Comeback Tour is Slaying Monsters, which is the first book in the Boy Bands and Dragons series, released by Riverfolk Publishing.
And now, on with the podcast.
Hello, and it's been a while.
It's been a minute, yeah. We what did we do? Was this a break?
Well, I had some remodeling going on in the house, and I lost my recording studio, so that was kind of the thing. And I've had a very busy fall.
You've been writing.
Well, not only writing, but my book came out.
Ta-da!
Yes.
Oh, wait. Say that again, then do the claps.
Okay. My book came out.
No, that's not the one.
My book came out.
Yay!
There we go. So yeah, at the end of October, my book came out on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. It is called Our Comeback Tour is Slaying Monsters. It is the first in a series called Boy Bands and Dragons. And yeah, it is out in the world now.
Woohoo! It's out in the world. You can buy it on Amazon or
through Kindle Unlimited.
You can get it through Kindle Unlimited. Excellent.
Yeah.
Go read it.
We'll have a link on the website.
It's very fun.
All right. And now, podcasting time.
Podcasting time.
Just a refresher, we are reading Christopher Vogler's The Writer's Journey, and we are covering the classic Heroes with a Thousand Faces writer's journey.
And we're at stage 6. So if you're joining us just now and you've never listened to this podcast before, you might want to go back, and listen to stage 1.
We are on a stage called Tests, Allies, and Enemies.
It's very odd because this is such a short chapter, and yet
we are reading a book to go alongside this writing craft book because all the examples in the writing craft book are old movies, and so it's useful to have a modern novel to see if it actually works. The book we're covering is John Scalzi's Kaiju Preservation Society, and I counted the pages. The first 5 stages cover about 70 pages in the book, and then you have this stage, Tests, Allies, and Enemies, which is 100 pages. And then the last several stages all go into about 80 pages. So a third of the book is made up of tests, allies, and enemies. And almost nothing is said for how to write it in this craft book.
I mean, he doesn't really tell you how to write anything in this whole craft book, but he does give you guidelines on what should it appear.
Yeah, for the meeting the mentor, there's a whole bunch of varieties of mentors. There's a whole bunch of ways this can come out. He even had the whole, what is the dramatic meaning of these things, or why does these things have to happen? And this is very light on that stuff.
Yeah. In terms of options to choose from, there aren't many in this chapter.
So it's like you were using the hero's journey to write your story. And, you have an obvious ordinary world, and you have an obvious mentor that comes in, and you have a call and answering the call, and you have a first fight as the hero got into the world. And then you're left with your hero treading water or doing something until they get to the point where they're fighting the really, really big bad guys for the big finale. But you're kind of left at your own wit's end to decide what to do in this middle section.
Yeah. It doesn't really go into, the different options or descriptions of how testing actually works. I mean, it does a little bit, but not really. There's a paragraph dedicated to the 3-act structure in Act 2, which is where the test, allies, and enemies would take place. But, I mean, you're really on your own. If I were writing a book, I would kind of wonder, well, how would I increase the tension through this training? How much training is enough? Who's involved in this training? Does it really have to be training? It doesn't even sound right to me. I don't know if I need my hero trained, quote unquote. Things like that, which do not get covered in this chapter.
Or should I add a bunch of allies right now? Should I have a conflict with the bad guy? How much of a conflict should I have with the bad guy? How should all these things come together? There's not a game plan at this point. It's kind of you do you.
Yeah, which is really unhelpful.
On the other hand, this is your story. Like, you can't tell someone else how to write their story. You can tell them how to set things up. You can tell them what's required at the end, but kind of the middle part is where you fill it in and you have your own ideas of how to get everything lined up, or you should.
True. So that is one thing. He does not tell you how to write your book.
So you are planning a book right now.
Yeah.
And you've actually given me a pretty good premise of how it's going to start off.
If you want to know about it, you can go to that episode. It's where Renee makes a monster.
And, you've also alluded to some of the stuff that's going to happen at the very end. But then you've got a set of adventures. And do you have in your mind what these middle adventures are going to be?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm relying a lot on history and medical advancements.
Okay.
So he learns. He literally is being trained. He's training himself, but he's learning through history and making gains. And they're the exact same gains that appear in history.
Mm-hmm. And you know where he wants to end up. So it's kind of a matter of like going back and building all that stuff to get into that stage.
I'm not exact. I know where he wants to end up. I don't know where he is going to end up because the book ends in our future, maybe like 50 years into our future. So he's going to be in a bit of a sci-fi land in the end. I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out, but this is one of those books where I don't need to know until later.
Okay. In that case, maybe you don't really need that much prescribed ideas from a craft book if by the time you get yourself all set up, you kind of know where you want your story to go.
Yeah. I know who a lot of the characters are going to be. I know if they're going to be villains. I know if he's going to be with them, if they're going to be friends, if they're going to be betrayed. I know a lot of stuff like that. So it's interesting reading this chapter because there's so little nuance in any of it. There's really just nothing that helpful here. Don't worry, dear listener. We are going to give you some helpful bits, whatever's in here. But yeah, it really just comes down to there's not a lot of nuance on like how do you maybe train your protagonist without boring the reader? Mm-hmm. How much do they really need? Again, the word training doesn't really work for me. It seems odd to me that we would be training our hero. But I guess our hero is learning how to deal with this world and the laws of this world and how to manipulate the laws of this world that they're in.
Right. A video game very much needs training because you need to have the skills to complete the end of the quest. And similarly, a adventure story does need training because we start the character off in the ordinary world not knowing anything and we finish with them saving the day. There has to be a progression. Mm-hmm. And all the stuff in the middle here is what makes it believable that the hero can take on the challenge at the very end and succeed. So from the standpoint of character development, it's training. From the standpoint of somebody reading the book, it should be adventure.
And it is important to note, usually if you're writing a hero's journey, they are going on an adventure. Yeah.
I did like at the very beginning, he said that the audience's first impression of the special world should strike a sharp contrast with the ordinary world, and that the tests and allies and things that the hero experiences should all be in the special world. And as a writer, you should do the most to contrast the special world with where the hero came from originally, because that's why we're reading the book, or that's why your audience is reading the book.
Right. Yeah, he says a special world, even a figurative one, has a different feel, a different rhythm, different priorities and values, and different rules. The special world has new conditions than the old world. Fish out of water story. Mm-hmm. Right? The fish is like, oh my God. The character who ends up in another world is like, oh my God, what do we do? And they have to get their bearings. And the audience enjoys watching them try.
Yeah. Or going back to The Hobbit, he's going on an adventure. Suddenly all the rules that worked in Hobbit Town no longer work here. And that's what we're experiencing through his eyes as he's progressing.
Yeah.
So, ways that you can do this progression. As I said at the beginning, we've got tests, allies, and enemies. We're going to take them one at a time, and we're going to reference them back to the Kaiju Preservation Society and see what comes out of that.
Okay, cool. Should we just talk about like the new world, like how this world is different than the other one?
We could talk about how the kaiju world is different than the other one. Actually, a good example of where the Scalzi shows how different that world is in the conversation with Bryn McDonald that we discussed last podcast, where it's like, well, this world doesn't work this way. Well, here's a binder that tells you. And as you pointed out, he does a great job of like laying down all the different rules for this new world right there.
Here's another summary that occurs later in the book. Jamie is talking to a scientist, and they're talking about how it's so crazy in this world and how people's expectations, they have to revise their expectations. And suddenly, once they do, they're capable of new things. New things can happen. And she says, it feels weird because not only are you being forced to look at this terrible event in a whole new way, and in a way that's positive for the world to exist in, but you're also not allowed to have it completely rewrite your opinion of the event in our world, because back home, it's still a terrible thing. You're feeling cognitive dissonance, Jamie. Two contradictory yet entirely valid within their context thoughts about the same subject. And humans hate that shit. We hate it so much. The worst answer for anything is, it depends.
It's a kind of a meta level where in The Hobbit, we never have a discussion between Gandalf and Bilbo about, how different this world is that he's gone into and how unlikely it is that a hobbit would be a hero in this world. We just kind of gloss on over and push it through. But here, maybe perhaps also because readers are more sophisticated about their fantasy and science fiction stories, they want that little bit of speculation delivered directly to the readers.
Right. Bringing in the Hobbit, or not the Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings, there's this great scene where Gandalf and Frodo notice that they're being followed by Gollum, right, by Smeagol. And Frodo says something like, my uncle should have killed him when he had the chance. And Gandalf has to school him a little bit. Some deserve life, some deserve death. Or are you going to be the one to give it to him? So it's kind of like the old rules in your head of how justice should work don't necessarily work anymore. And so, Frodo had to kind of figure that out and grow as a person. It's easy to look at the world in black and white. But in this new world, it's not a black and white world anymore. So that's one way to get a character to change in this new world. One thing they are being tested on is not just do they have mad science skills or, bow hunting skills or computer hacking skills. It's do they change? Like, does their mind change?
Do you see Jamie's mind changing in this book?
Not really.
No.
He's just a nice guy.
Yeah.
He's too smart, I guess. I don't know.
For all that Scalzi hits all the major points of the hero's journey in this book, the one thing I really don't see is a fundamental character growth. Jamie's a great person to begin with. They've had some bad luck. They get this opportunity. They really do well in this opportunity. And, they always care about their friends. They always care about these things. There's really only one kind of mistake that they make. And even that isn't really acknowledged as a mistake later on. Not really mentioned. I think he wanted an upbeat story, and so he wanted an upbeat main character, an upbeat bunch of allies, and just kind of taking it from there. Yeah.
This book reminds me a bit of West Wing. It's a bit of a fantasy. Nobody would be this nice to everybody so much.
Yes.
And that's a different topic we'll get into. But I'm starting to like this book less just because there's less tension than I wanted there to be. But anyway, we should talk about testing, right? What does the testing entail?
So back to Vogler. What he says is that testing is part of the adjustment to the special world. A series of trials and challenges that are meant to prepare him or her for the greater ordeals ahead. Like we said before, you need to have all these events happen so that we, the readers, can believe that the hero can take on the big bad at the end. And then goes into completely useless example from Greek mythology, which I didn't think had anything to do with anything.
Not only that, but Vogler pulls from a tale. So the tale gets referenced of a Psyche who had fallen in love with Cupid. This tale has been wisely interpreted by Robert A. Johnson in his book on feminine psychology, She. Thanks for that. It's wisely interpreted. How would he know? I don't know. Anyway, so essentially what he breaks down is like if the adventure were a college learning experience, Act 1 would be a series of entrance exams, and the test stage of Act 2 would be a series of pop quizzes meant to sharpen the hero's skill in specific areas and to prepare her for the most rigorous midterm and final exams coming up.
I don't know about you, but I just love reading books that take me back to what it was like to be a student. And
Oh,
just take
yeah.
exams all the time because that was like so much fun.
Yeah, I often reminisce about finals, wishing I could go back. And
He just takes all the fun out of it. I mean, like,
I just kind of wonder, what is the adjustment of the special world when it comes to using this metaphor? I mean, I guess the student is adjusting to what exactly?
I think you just want something that's bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you're looking for advice from this, you could take it to just mean that your hero shouldn't face the absolute most biggest crisis during this period because it's going to make the climax actually not be nearly as interesting. You need to be holding a little bit back all that time so that the final fight really is all that.
So like a teacher term we use is scaffolding when we're doing a lesson plan. And you scaffold the lesson so that, you help them more in the beginning, but then as each lesson goes on, you pull more away and you keep just out of reach, so that they have to reach for it. The student has to learn. So in this way, I guess you're scaffolding the tests, right? You don't like throw out the big bad at them first because then they'll just die.
Right.
Right. You have to like slowly level them up.
Or sports stories. You have a series of games, but you don't have the big game until the end of the show.
Right.
Or on a quest, they're traveling through some places, but they don't get to the really dangerous lands until the very end.
True.
But I think that if you find that your climax isn't exciting enough, the trick isn't to go back to this part of the section and make them more boring. The trick is then that you just have to come up with a better climax.
Right.
Because in my readings, I like to see the hero actually being engaged. I don't like to see it too obvious that we're hand-holding the hero all the way through. I like to have the hero actually being seriously challenged and seriously in danger of losing their lives, even if the end fight is going to be that much more.
Right. I think it might be also important to remind the listener that, this new world, this special world, is dominated or controlled by the antagonist. Sometimes there will be Vogler says there's going to be traps and barricades and checkpoints, for the hero. But usually the hero is not in complete control of this world. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fun to watch the hero. And the hero wouldn't need to level up.
Either the bad stuff in the world is coming from the villain or the world itself could be antagonistic, like in this world where everything is trying to kill you.
Like literally everything in the Kaiju Preservation Society book, that whole world, everything is literally trying to kill you. There's lots of reminders don't worry, everything's trying to kill you. Oh yes, no, everything is trying to kill you.
So some of the tests that people talk about is a continuation of training. And Scalzi does a great continuation of training in the midpoint of the book where Jamie is getting on-the-ground training for what to do if he's actually on the ground. Up until this point, he's just been flying around a helicopter seeing the bad stuff. But now he's actually brought down to be trained. And he's getting trained by Ridu Tagak. And she says, the reason our base is in the trees, in a tone that indicated that she did not expect it to be a question. Yes, I said, the jungle floor is dangerous. It is dangerous, Tagak agreed. But it's one thing to know it in your head, another to know in your heart. I know you know it in here, she pointed to my head. Then she pointed to my heart. Now it's time to know it here. And what follows is him getting attacked by coconut crabs.
Big ones.
So did you look up coconut crabs when you were reading this?
No.
They're really big.
Are they? Do they come after you?
Not really. I mean, they're kind of they're big and they'll kind of investigate you, but they're pretty actually easy to deal with, which is a good example of what Vogler's talking about. While it's very scary when Jamie gets attacked by the coconut crabs, it actually turns out that if you keep your head on and you have the various tools that they have, you can be pretty fast to grab them and throw them really hard fast. Such as later on, he runs into a pile of them and we see him just go right through and throw them all out of the way so that they can complete the mission.
Yeah.
So that was one test. And then the test I really liked was the test where Jamie and two of the other scientists he works with are planting monitoring devices to monitor a breeding kaiju or a kaiju that's laying eggs. Mm-hmm. And that one's going really well until, I believe the line is, one of their compatriots literally said, "That went better than I thought," before he slipped and fell in the moss and something the size of a panther came for him out of the NATO jelly.
Yeah.
I like that section. How did you see that as testing?
Well, if I'm going to give something away, so the person who keeps their head and is able to stop that panther is the protagonist. And so it comes after this guy, and Jamie is able to protect him.
Yep. Although Niam actually beats the crap out of it first.
Okay, right. But Jamie is able to kill it.
Yes.
Or at least harm it in some way. There's a quote in here where it says, "It opened its mouth wide, its scream lost inside the noise of the helicopter rotors, and hunched itself up to leap," which was what I was waiting for. My footing was just fine. I just faked out the creepy fucker, and now its mouth was open. I shot the canister directly into it. And then in italics it says, "Do you think you're going to be that good of a shot?" I remembered Ridu Tagak asking me when I was about shooting a canister at a creature. As it happens, I still wasn't that great of a shot, but I was also shooting from a very, very close distance.
And yeah, this is, I think, a great example of how far Jamie's come from when they start off and they're just riding around a helicopter and seeing the monsters to being on the ground floor, defending against them and protecting people.
Right.
Which is critical for the climax of the story, where we have to believe that Jamie can actually handle a gun, can handle running around in dangerous situations, can keep their head on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
That was testing. Next up is allies.
Allies and enemies. But allies, really.
Yeah, let's take one at a time. So the comment here is that it's natural for heroes just arriving in the special world to spend some time figuring out who can be trusted and relied upon for special services and who is not to be trusted. So often a hero does not travel to the world with their friends. They actually travel alone, and then part of the test is to make friends who start off as people they seek information from or run into some particular situation and then become friends and allies as they go along.
Yeah.
I think the most obvious one here is the Star Wars with Luke Skywalker and Han Solo.
I was thinking of Labyrinth, but yeah.
Yeah.
Vogler says that this is part of the test, is whether or not your protagonist is a good judge of character. Mm-hmm. Right? In the Labyrinth, Sarah makes friends, right? But she's kind of overly positive. And Hoggle is one of those, I'm not friends, Mm-hmm. I can't be friends with you. And she's like, are you sure? And like, she is a good judge of character because she can see good in him. But I guess Luke Skywalker also sees good in his father later on in the series of Star Wars.
By that point, we're in the shadow and the enemies.
Oh, okay. We've gone too far. But yeah, so we've got these allies. You've got new friends that help you get through these trials.
Mm-hmm. We got the sidekicks, which we covered quite a bit. So the other reason probably that Vogler to spend that much time with this is that these are all the archetypes we've been introduced before, that we've learned extensively about.
And if you want to know what an archetype is, you'll have to go back. Go to our website, or you can go to other episodes. We've already covered them.
It wouldn't be a good episode if we didn't cast some shade on the writer of the craft book. In the sidekick section, he wants to give examples of comical sidekicks played by character actors such as Walter Brennan, Gabby Hayes, Fuzzy Knight, and Slim Pickens.
Who the heck are those people?
I looked them up, and they were all in the cowboy. So they were extensive actors. Some of them, I think Walter Brennan was one of the few actors out there to have won 3 Academy Awards. But again, would it have been that hard for him to come up with somebody a little bit more modern for this? I don't even know when he was writing this 25 years ago if people knew who exactly Fuzzy Knight was.
He's got the Lone Ranger, Tonto, and he's got Zorro, and he talks about Shane, which is a really old Western. I've seen it. It's pretty good. And then he's got Dances with Wolves in there. I don't...
Well, those ones are at least more recent. I mean,
Shane is not.
Yeah.
I don't think millennials know who the Lone Ranger is or have seen Dances with Wolves. Anyone who's like 25 years old, they don't even think they know who Kevin Costner is. And that's not a bad thing. And so, he ends that part with such figures may freely cross the boundaries between mentor and trickster, sometimes aiding the hero and acting as his conscience, sometimes comically goofing up or causing mischief, which is kind of like, the trickster.
Mm-hmm. One thing I liked about Kaiju Preservation Society is that there really weren't any goofs. Like, everybody there is super competent. They super know their stuff. They super take care of things. And one of the allies that he makes there is... we both agreed was our favorite. Martin Satine, the helicopter pilot, is pretty awesome.
Yeah. He puts that dude in his place.
He's curt, he's competent. You can tell he's got Jamie and those guys' back. And it just, he's not central all the time, but he shows up whenever it's something serious.
Right. That is what is also odd about this book. He doesn't really have issues with a lot of the characters. Actually, everybody gets along really well, right? They don't really have fights with other characters. They don't really... Everyone is so very positive to one another and helping one another against this thing that is so much bigger than them. But they're all the time positive.
Yes.
And I understand that it's a metaphor because this book was written during the pandemic and it's supposed to be, you know, people banding together in overwhelming odds. But that doesn't have enough tension to keep it as interesting as I wanted. And really, this book is just, what is this world like? If you really like world building, this book is for you. If you want a strong plot, not so much.
Well, it has a strong plot. It just doesn't have the same emotional attachment.
I mean, you can disagree with me if you want, but to me, not enough is happening in this book.
Okay.
Not enough happens. It takes forever for anything to happen. That is significant. And so, to me, it got a little boring so far. And I haven't finished it, but, you know, we found the main antagonist. I've gotten to that point, and I'm like, I had to go through all of this other stuff to just learn what the world was, just so we can now get to the main conflict.
Do you think that the reason why you're feeling this way is because the actual pacing of the story is slow, or because there's not enough happening with Jamie personally to carry you through?
I guess maybe that, yeah. I had expected things to go differently in the book. I had expected his life to be more in danger. I had expected there to be more conflict within the other characters that he's dealing with. You know, more conflict. Not we're all getting along and the only conflict is the things that are outside of us and that we're all trying to deal with, which is great and nice and handholdy. But to me, a good story isn't just... So there's another story that had the exact same reaction too. Something about the big angry planet.
Long Journey to a Small Angry Planet.
Yes. That book drove me crazy. They were just so positive to each other and so nice. And, you know, just doing this wink, wink. Oh, I got you, girl. That to me is not a good story. That is boring. I don't need that kind of banter. In fact, I don't want that kind of banter. I don't know if I've been trained in the sense that as a reader, I've read so many books that all of these authors have trained me, only trouble is interesting. But really, only trouble is interesting. And there's not enough trouble for Jamie. There's not enough. Like, I've had to read 100 pages of him surviving pretty easily. Yeah, I mean, he's had a few flip-ups and whatever, but mostly it's all okay. You know, there's already even an award ceremony. He got an award for surviving. I'm like, oh my God. This place is very saccharine.
Well, this actually is a good example of how you can follow the hero's journey all the way along and maybe not actually engage your audience because you're only doing plot points. I would say that this is a very heavy plotted story because one thing's happening, it's leading to the next, it's leading to the next. But what's not happening is Jamie isn't growing and changing as a character. Jamie isn't having emotional bad days or recovering or having to sort something out with another person. There's an example here where one of the secondary characters gets into a strong argument with another character about the science. And afterwards they're like, that person's going to hate you for the rest of this time. It's like, the person's like, no, I can make cookies. I make great cookies. She makes the person cookies. It's all over and good.
And I'm like, thanks for nothing. Like, why does it have to be good? Why am I reading this? Like, I am waiting for something big and I don't think it's ever going to happen. And I guess maybe I had an expectation going into this book, but I have an expectation in going into every book. When the trouble marker doesn't get set, that is such a high expectation because that's why you read the book.
Yeah. There is a whole movement of a kind of fiction right now that people are going for that's called cozy. It's filled with a lot of really nice people and you don't have as much interpersonal conflict as is a more traditional plot. In a more traditional plot, one of the villains probably would have been, or one of the shadows would probably have been one of Jamie's coworkers that was screwing stuff up. There would be some sort of conflict within the actual work area he was in that was in danger that then would have consequences for the world as a whole and preserving the kaiju and maybe affecting our world because of some conflict between the people in this base that are under these very strange circumstances that have to work together. But instead, we have a very idealistic society where everyone does their job. It's a very positive work environment.
There's a lot of allies in this story.
There are. There is one enemy that we are introduced to at the end.
Right.
And the question then is, when Scalzi was writing this book, was that one enemy enough to actually engage you as a reader into this story? Because this isn't a cozy story. I mean, while the base is very cozy, there is real conflict going on. There is real stakes. There is really a chance for things to screw up. And so Scalzi brings in the enemy. I mean, I don't think that Vogler says very much about enemies other than, they're enemies. But in this book, you want to tell about the enemy that shows up?
So in the beginning of the book, Jamie is fired from their job, and the boss is kind of a jerk. Well, the boss comes back. He gets to be a tourist to come and check out the world because, of course, the villain is this rich asshole. Mm-hmm. So rich assholes get whatever they want, right? Mm-hmm. And he gets to visit the Kaiju world. Mm-hmm. And it's Jamie's job to show them around kind of and guide them. And he discovers that his boss is one of them. And so that is the big bad, at least so far.
Or his ex-boss.
His ex-boss.
Comes to the world. And up until this point, Rob Saunders is an asshole. But is there something in this part of the book where he's brought in that actually raises him to the level of villain as opposed to just jerk? You think?
The part I got was he tried to get down to the ground floor of the world so that he could take a sample of one of the eggs and bring it back to the earth, which is like a big no-no. He wanted an actual sample, mm-hmm. and he tried to trick his way into getting that.
Mm-hmm. And in the book, it's Jamie that uncovers this.
Yes.
By setting him up and
recording him
and launching tree crabs at him.
But more of like a, don't mess with me. I'm launching these at you. Not mm-hmm. even like I'm going to abandon you to these crabs.
Well, I mean, that's how he got the guy to confess, but yes.
Right. But he got what he wanted. Again, like he gets what he wants. You know what's missing in this book? Mm-hmm. So when we were doing Bickham, mm-hmm. from Scene and Structure, mm-hmm. and he says at the end of every scene, it's either a yes and or no but, and he called it catastrophe. There aren't enough catastrophes in this book.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't always end with a yes, the character gets what they want, or it's no, the character doesn't get what they want and more crap happens to them, or yes, the character gets what they want, but it's like, no, the character really just overcomes stuff and is fine.
Mm-hmm. When my husband and I were reading this book, the one part where he had a real big problem with it is that after Jamie uncovers what Rob was trying to do, he lets Rob off. He doesn't go and tell his superiors, anybody about this extra information that he's found out. And it's critical for the story to function because we have to have Rob come back and cause more trouble. And if Jamie revealed what he knew about Rob, then that would end the story. But a lot of bad things happen because Jamie doesn't reveal this. And there's no link to the fact that it's Jamie's fault for not telling people what he knew,
right,
or what they knew. And that's an aspect that just gets kind of pushed to the side without any consequence. I think if Bickham was writing this thing, there would be consequences. Or if Bickham was analyzing this book, he would say there had to be more consequences for what Jamie had done.
Yes, I would agree. And I haven't really got to whatever consequences are happening because I just stopped writing at that point mm-hmm. because I haven't finished the book. I think Bickham would have complained about his training.
Okay.
Too much went well. He survived it all, and it was like, okay, then. Well, let's just keep going. Can we move on to new rules?
Sure.
The new rules of the special world must be learned quickly by the hero and the audience. This book, he doesn't learn them quickly enough, not even to his detriment, but so much of the book is dedicated to him succeeding that it drives me nuts.
Well, I mean, one could say that means he is learning the rules, but you actually would prefer if he learned the rules by failing or by somewhat failing and having to make their way back.
Right, and it would have made it go quicker. He's not learning quickly. He is learning this world at a reasonable pace. Mm-hmm. He's not thrown into the deep end of the pool at all. He is put into the shallow end with the little floaty things on his arms.
Another element here is it shows that actually because there isn't any serious struggle, you actually don't see this world as being that dangerous.
Right. I mean, maybe it is in the end, but I'm already convinced that it's not that bad because they're already okay.
Right. So it's a situation where because to make the final climax serious enough, You think that they're taking too easy of steps all the way through, and the tests and the allies and the enemies just aren't big enough.
Or it's dangerous to people they want to destroy anyway. Like, it's dangerous to the people that deserve it, not the people that don't.
Okay.
That's not a good story to me. I mean, it's going to be nice that maybe people are going to get theirs, you know. It's like, yeah, that jerk face deserves to get theirs, you know, and like die in the world or whatever. But that's just like a happy ending, and that's kind of a fantasy because we all know the billionaires get away with it.
Mm-hmm. I think that you pointed out a really big issue you have with following the hero's journey too rote and not having other elements that engage the readers. I personally think that the plots that Scalzi has for this section, the tests and the allies and the enemies, would be strong enough for you if Jamie had more emotional conflict. I don't think you necessarily needed to see him have a bad infection from a crab or having someone necessarily get physically injured. But I think that if there was a more of an emotional conflict in these things, if Jamie felt bad for something afterwards, or somebody else got mad at Jamie for something that he could or couldn't do, and then he was at a disadvantage, then you might be rooting for him more.
I just think the stakes need to be higher. I think that the base he's in should have been burned down like a third of the way through the book.
Okay.
Somebody should have like effed that shit up, and they are all running for their lives out in this world of the kaiju, and they're going to try to get eaten. They're at their wits' end, and they're doing everything they can. And throughout that process, Jamie is also uncovering some secret thing going on and trying to find that villain. Like, to me, that's exciting. That's like, oh, this is just kaiju. Oh, this is a special world. Oh, they're in trouble, you know? And now I'm like, no, you know, they tell him this is very scary. Everything's trying to eat you. He goes to the ground floor. His life wasn't even in danger that whole time. He thought it was, but in the end, it's like, oh, by the way, I had everything covered. You're fine. You know, it's like, what?
So here's this element of realism that Scalzi wanted. He wanted to create a world where if you drop someone on the ground, they would be dead in 15 minutes in any place except for the most controlled situations. So if they actually had blown up the base, he would have to change the world significantly to give them a path to survive.
I guess.
And he'd also have to make Jamie a lot more competent than Jamie was. Jamie would have to have some sort of bigger insight because he could not be saving the world with just a master's in science fiction.
But if he was done through the proper training, he could have. And that's what would have made a really cool story. If part of his training is watching somebody get eaten alive by crabs, that he didn't realize the crabs would be able to eat them alive, that's a lesson. He's learned something there.
How would you write the character such that he could survive in that world? Like,
well,
what would he have done to survive the ground floor?
I don't know. That's part of what's so fun about reading those books. I want to know. I do. I don't know. I'm not writing the story.
But like, would you give them more weapons? Would you give them a special suit? Would you give them telepathic communication? Would something like that kind of thing?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm not John Scalzi. I'm not the author. I'm just the reader. The reader wants the fun. I want the fun. The questions you're asking me is reminding me of like Project Hail Mary or The Martian. Mm-hmm. Those were really good stories. There wasn't a ton of action in them. There was a lot of problem solving, and there was lots of like fist bumping between characters. And yet there was lots of tension and lots of plot and lots of things going on. And life really was dangerous, and they were about to die all the time. And they worked their way through it. And part of the fun was watching them figure out how to not die. We don't get to have the fun of watching Jamie figure out how to not die. To me, that is what's wrong with this book. I think I figured it out.
All right.
You helped me get there.
I helped you get there.
So back to this allies and enemies and testing. Depending on the kind of story you're writing and depending on the reader you're looking for, your testing either has to be life or death stuff, or it has to be what Kaiju is in the Lonely Planet book.
What you're saying is, or you go for the audience that wants a much more positive thing where they never have to really worry that anyone's going to die, but they can just enjoy the world unfold. Kind of an amusement park sort of thing. It's like a Disney ride where, like, you know, you're going to see a whole bunch of cool stuff, but you know the Disney ride's going to get you to the end of the queue, and you're going to leave and be very excited. And it wasn't a lot of fun, but you never actually were worried that you weren't going to make it to the end.
Yeah, that you were going to die. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an amusement park. And I don't want to feel like I'm at an amusement park when I'm reading I want the stakes to be real.
You want it to have a chance that the hero can't make it out alive. And up to this point, it really doesn't feel like Jamie is at danger. HR is a little bit too careful on their workers. They're not going to let anyone die.
It's just a different kind of book. And maybe it's a new kind of book, or maybe it's just the books I've been reading. A lot of the books I read, I mean, shoot, Ned gets his head chopped off. I mean, he literally doesn't survive in Game of Thrones, you know? And it was amazing. I was like, wow. And those kids, they are all going to die throughout the whole series. I mean, every chapter. Are they going to die yet? Are they going to die yet? Nope. This is how they survived. This is how they survived. And I kept reading them all.
And I stopped at a certain point.
Oh.
Because part of it was I knew that people weren't necessarily going to survive, that Martin was going to kill them off in however way he wanted. But let's also point out that at a certain point, Martin couldn't finish writing the darn books because it was all about people dying all the way along, and he kind of lost the trail for how to bring it all together.
I guess I'm not actually sure why he has such writer's block with it. I haven't read enough of his life journal, but I can see there being writer's block. I just don't know why. Just like, keep it going, dude. Like, you're on a roll, and he's got enough threads open to keep it going. So I don't know why he had to stop, except for the fact that he started working on TV shows and movie and all this other stuff. It's like, okay, well, his life is different now, and he wants to move on and do those kinds of things.
Probably the issue with Game of Thrones also was such an expansive world that he wasn't sure how to finish it up. He kept opening up more and more stuff. And if you have a single standalone book, you can have a lot of horrible stuff happen all the way along. It's only one book, and you're going to finish it up at the end.
Yeah. Anyway, totally off topic.
I think we're just about done, except I want to comment one other little plot thing that Vogler had here, which is actually kind of useful, I think, for this middle section. He talks about the watering hole. And not all stories have this. It's basically the bar everyone goes to. It's a place where you meet villains. It's a place where you meet allies. It's a place where you get new tasks given to you. And it's an incredibly artificial construct. And yet it seems to work really well. You're getting your hero out. They're in this special world. So you give them a place in that special world where you can set further things up. Obviously, there's the Star Wars reference. What I came to mind of was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the Bronze.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's always going to the Bronze. Everyone's always meeting the Bronze. Something's happening in the Bronze.
So if you haven't watched Buffy, essentially it's like the nightclub. But for a while it was 18 and under, and then it became 21 and older when they became older.
Yes, they got to go to different nights.
Yeah. They'd hang out, and there would be a live band. The Arctic Monkeys played there once. That was pretty cool. Yeah. So they say, the watering hole is a natural congregating place and a good spot to observe and get information. That's it. Mm-hmm. There you go. And it's Mos Eisley. He mentions Casablanca, various other
old movies. If you want to actually get some useful advice out of this section, is your middle section, your heroes progressing through, they're getting tests, they're meeting individuals to become their allies, they're meeting individuals to become their enemies. And if you're kind of at a loss for where I'll put it, you could always just set them at a bar and have things start happening from there.
Yeah. So one more. So this made me think of The Matrix. He says, gambling and saloons go together, and games of chance are a natural feature of the testing stage. So it's a place you can test your character. Heroes may want to consult the oracles to see how luck will favor them. And I thought, oh, it's The Matrix. And he did. He ended up going to a different place, like a house. Mm-hmm. And it had these like savant kids in it. And that's where he met the oracle. Wasn't she actually called the Oracle?
I think so, yeah.
Anyway, that was kind of cool. I did like the thing about the bar, although I did rant about the bar in the last episode of how boring it was.
Well, all these things can be boring. The flip side of the hero's journey is just because you're following the hero's journey doesn't mean you're creating an interesting story or that you're going to engage your audience. Just because you're moving characters from point A to point B and you're following all these things doesn't necessarily engage the audience. I think you've actually struck upon a real issue with following the hero's journey.
Yeah. Just because you hit everything doesn't mean people are going to want to read it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a magic formula.
Or it's not a guaranteed formula.
It's not a guaranteed formula. No, no. It does not a good story make, but it does give you a template that maybe helps you get there closer, maybe. Yeah. Especially if you don't know what to do. You know, you don't know where the story should go. You don't know what kind of characters it should have. This is, it's helpful. And a lot of stories, I've been successful with it.
Well, and like the other thing we found is that for some people that are really good at creating characters, creating real individuals, creating all these things, sometimes they don't know what story to take their characters through. They just have very well-developed characters. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of a framework to add external conflict and a journey they can take.
Yeah, but it's not so great for character development.
No, it's not there.
Mm-mm. And what's her face? When we read Bird by Bird, Anne Lamott, she had that whole chapter that we discussed about plot-driven stories versus character-driven.
Yeah, and Lamont's technique was, just stick your characters in an elevator and just see what comes out.
Yeah, like trap them somewhere and then
the story will just show up from that.
Yeah, yeah, and you don't need all this.
Well, yes, but that creates a different type of story. And sometimes people want more than just the characters banging heads in the elevator. That creates a different sort of story. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, I think we have covered this 7-page chapter and
to death.
And I wanted to do this just because it's so much. It covers so much of the second act, and next time we will push forward into the climax, and the end of the book.
The third act, yeah. So I guess that was the second act, and then we start entering into the third act with stage 7, the approach to the inmost cave. And before we leave you, dear listener, just want to remind you that there is a tip jar that you can go to onto our website. If you would like to see the show notes, they aren't just average show notes. No. We've got what we call snark notes. And I really put a lot of work into making a very comprehensive study guide for the things that we talk about on this podcast. And thirdly, we have a process group that we invite you to. It is free. It is fun. We got some really cool people there, and we talk about writing. We don't read each other's work or anything. We just kind of like a support group because, writing's lonely. Yeah. Is that everything?
I think so. And if you are enjoying this podcast and you have a friend that you think might enjoy it, please pass it their way. We would love to have more listeners.
That would be awesome.
All right.
And by the way, Kim, I really love the space.
We'll have to see how the recording actually turns out, if it's echoey or not, but yeah.
Yeah, like the color, she painted this whole zone like this really cool green.
It's no longer quite a closet anymore. Now it's more of a nook.
Yeah, it's not a closet. It literally was a closet. I guess, can I still say the joke, though?
You can, but...
We literally are two ladies in a closet right now. Okay, we're next to a closet. We're not in the closet anymore. That's okay.
That's okay.
All right.
Thank you guys so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga-Adam. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
I don't know. Maybe we'll remove that whole conversation from the podcast.